The episode begins with Gwen reminding Ben that he's supposed to go and grab a cake for Max for later on, to which he responds that it wouldn't be a problem for Accelerate and hits the watch, changing into his Kineceleran form. Though before he could run off, something flashes beside the two of them as a floating magic seal of some sort appeared. It looked to be some sort of six-pointed star made up of two triangles overlapping and a cat face of some kind that was a powdery blue in color. The seal opened up and someone flew out, snatching Gwen before they could realize what was going on, and flew back into the open portal with Ben chasing after them. As Max walks up, holding firewood and looking around confused that the two weren't at the rust bucket, assuming they'd probably gone to explore the woods or something. The episode continues as normal, with Ben rescuing Gwen from whomever had snatched her, with people calling him Ben 10K, and a redhead girl blowing him a kiss, which Gwen looked annoyed about, making Ben put his arm down as he was waving. They turned to see a rather large statue that read Hero of Heroes, Ben 10,000 on it, confusing the two of them. Suddenly, a rhino with power armor begins to blast at them, stating he was going to have his revenge, with Ben asking if he knew them, to which they growled that he'd forgotten already and that his name was Exoskull, and started blasting at Ben, who kept dodging them before timing out, and the person that had snatched Gwen casting a spell blasting at Exoskull. Though, unlike in the show, she doesn't try to get close to him. Rather, she keeps blasting at him from a distance, flying out of the way of his attacks and putting up a barrier when needed. Suddenly, an older version of Accelerate, which also had an Omnitrix symbol, attacked Exoskull, while making quick work of them, and began doing a scan, stating, "Looks like Animo's work," before stating he'd go run a scan at HQ, while the person that had grabbed Gwen tried to speak with him, but he'd noticed Ben and Gwen and pointed at them, telling the woman to send them back, now. She agreed and tried to say something more, but he'd run off again. Gwen growls that he could be nicer, annoyed at the future Accelerate, when the woman revealed herself as a future version of Gwen. She starts to tell the two past versions of herself and Ben about what was going on, and about some strange crisis that was looming he wouldn't be able to handle alone, even after mastering the secrets of the Omnitrix. Future Gwen's belt begins to light up with a report about Fort DNA X as Grandpa Max shows up in the rust bucket, glad to see her and the two past versions of Gwen and Ben as well. Though past Gwen mentions that his shirt was 20 years out of style 20 years ago, with Max laughing that when you find a look that fits, as future Gwen, who'd gone by Gwendolyn since college, asks if he'd gotten the signal and he nods yes. Max takes them straight to the main unit of the fort and lets them get out of the, now upgraded to fly, rust bucket. The Gwens both got out first, with Ben about to go but asked if Grandpa Max was coming too, which Max responds that he hasn't needed his help in a long time. Unlike in the show, Gwen's gotten a better influence over Ben, and he'd taken notice how Grandpa seemed saddened by that, and spoke, telling him Ben 10,000 might not, but I still need you, making Max smile as he activates an autopilot and gets out to join them this time around. Ben tried to change into forearms, but ends up as Wildvine looking annoyed, and then the next thing we see is them all going into the fortress, ready to fight, looking around for the threat. A form of a large humanoid chicken man crashed through a wall, with future Gwen flying back to avoid them as Wildvine was slammed into by them. Animo walks out in the hulking form of a mutated gorilla with his head mounted onto the body in a glass jar. He'd started to run towards the Bens, but Max blasted them with a robotic blaster arm, surprising the 10-year-old versions of Ben and Gwen, as future Gwen tries to blast him too, but he deflects it with her moving out of the way of the blast again. 10-year-old Ben threw the seeds from his back at Animo, making them explode, as future Ben growls to stay out of his way and changes into Diamond Head, slamming his fist down and making crystals in case Animo, like how he did in the show, and the battle goes normally from there, with Animo ended up being beaten and entangled in metal, holding him there in place. Future Gwendolyn, tries to say something to Ben 10,000, but he changes into Accelerate and runs off with the 10-year-old versions of himself and Gwen, with Gwendolyn following him. The kids had asked about Animo and Ben 10,000 answered, and when they asked about Vilgax, he stated it wasn't pretty for anyone. Ben's impressed by the HQ and begins to explore around, though Ben 10,000 tells them to wait for Gwen and not to touch anything, and goes to work on something. Ben obviously doesn't listen and goes to check out more of the base, finding something neat on the wall. When Gwen reminds him that they were told not to touch anything, which Ben responds, "Why should I listen to me? You never do," before pressing the button and finding out that it was a hoverboard, and so began playing with it. Gwendolyn shows up as an alarm was starting to go off, and Ben 10,000 tells her to get the portal open and take them back, then runs off as she tries to say something, making Gwendolyn let out an annoyed growl that he wasn't listening, with Ben stating he wasn't going back, but was going to help. Future Ben looks surprised as Vilgax comes out of the shadows, and he and Animo and Vilgax all start to fight as Gwendolyn brings past Ben and Gwen to help out. Ben on a hoverboard tells the Gwens to take Animo while he helped deal with Vilgax before flying off on the board. The episode continues like normal, with Ben changing into Upgrade by accident and telling Future Ben that it was his fight too, which they, in the form of Diamond Head, hit the dial on Upgrade, changing him into Cannonbolt as the two continued to fight with Vilgax. Vilgax beats up on the Bens like in the show, telling them he knows all of Ben's alien moves because they were programmed into his DNA by Animo, with the voice of Max shouting out to "Get your claws off my grandson" before blasting Vilgax away. We see Cannonbolt walk over to Max, who was holding the same weapon he'd used 20 years ago against them, Cannonbolt telling him to help the Gwens. While that was going on, the Gwens were fighting against Animo, with Gwendolyn using ranged magic, even using her past self enhanced by magic as a projectile. Past Gwen asks if she knows any other spells for fighting, to which Gwendolyn then responds, "Of course I do, but I can't exactly do that while caring for 3, with both 10-year-old Gwen and Animo stopping to look at her, both saying 3 at the same time, before Animo was then blasted in the face by Max, sending him crashing into a wall. Past Ben gives Ben 10,000 the same speech he does in the show about what Ben Tennyson can do, to which he changes back into human form, stating that he should start fighting like himself again, while picking up a hoverboard that was left on the street when everyone cleared out because of the fighting. In his human form, Future Ben starts to taunt Vilgax by dodging his attacks while playing around on the hoverboard and smacking the Omnitrix on Past Ben, changing him into an alien he hadn't unlocked before. It appeared to be a living battery of some sort, and he'd looked confused but started to laugh in a strange sounding pitch, before zapping Vilgax and then combining himself into the power lines and leading the way off, with Ben 10,000 following behind him on the board and Vilgax behind them. The Bens lead Vilgax to the river area, and Past Ben zaps him again, stunning him before Ben 10,000 flies at him with the hoverboard and punches Vilgax in the face, sending him crashing into the water. Ben laughs maniacally as he then zaps the water, stunning Vilgax as he's floating there. And then Ben 10,000 changes into a blue alien lizard thing that blasts an ice ray out of its mouth and throws over the river. When asking its name, Ben 10,000 suggests Absolute Zero, but Ben says it's lame and suggests Arctic Guana instead. Both past and future versions of Ben and Gwen wish Grandpa Max a happy birthday with a small setup with gifts and cake on a table. Future Ben had his arms wrapped around Future Gwen's waist from behind. Seeing them like that had made Max smile, glad to see them together. It had been a long time since he'd seen Ben in human form. Though they get a transmission from an alien, Future Ben tells them to handle it themselves because it was his grandpa's birthday. Future Gwen pulls Past Gwen aside and tells her to enjoy her Ben while she has him, because she'll miss the fun-loving doofus, and prepares to send them back to the past, with Ben 10,000 handing Past Ben something, telling him it's something they almost forgot to get for Max in the past, and tells him that he'll figure out the watch himself and lets them head off. Once the past Ben and Gwen were through the portal and it closed, Gwendolyn then cleared her throat and began to speak. "Now that I've finally gotten your attention, there's something I need to tell you." Then proceeds to whisper something into Future Ben's ear we don't get to hear, though the look on his face shows clear surprise. We close out the episode the same as we do in the show, with Ben opening the cube and holding the cake for Max, telling him that they'd gotten one for him for his birthday.